I learned much of what I need to know from preschool, Charles Schulz's Peanuts, Mr. Rogers, and Ted Lasso. From the first, I learned to use my words and take turns. From Charlie Brown, I learned that life is fun, dogs are smart, you can get fooled again, the doctor is in, and children are wise. Charlie Brown said, "Sometimes I lay awake at night and I ask myself, why isn't the world perfect? Then a voice comes to me and says, we admit it, there are still a few kinks that need working out." Snoopy said, "Why can't we get all the people together in the world that we really like and then just stay together?" I guess that wouldn't work. Someone would leave. Then we would have to say goodbye. I hate goodbyes. I know what I need. I need more hellos. From Mr. Rogers, I learned it's good to be curious about many things. And he also said, listening is where love begins. Listening to ourselves and then to our neighbors. These lessons will be with me for the rest of my life. Although the fictional character Ted Lasso of the TV series by the same name is a more recent experience, I hope the wisdom the characters articulate via brilliant scripts will be lifelong principles for me as well. Ted is a high school football coach hired to coach a professional British soccer team, a sport about which he knows almost nothing. In the course of the series, what Ted teaches has tremendous impact on the lives he touches in ways that involve much more than sports. For example, Ted tells the story of how he overcame his fear of dogs. He concludes, "It's funny to think about the things in your life that can make you cry just knowing that they existed, and can then become the same thing that make you cry knowing that they're gone now." I think those things come into our lives to help us get from one place to a better one. In our best moments, I believe that is the way most human beings want to be. We have our struggles, we hurt others, we hurt ourselves. Hopefully, we try to learn from our mistakes. We try to nuance difficulties that come our way into lenses through which to view similar situations so that we can respond better when they occur. We want to believe in ourselves, one another, and the possibility that we can always do better. Let's accept all these premises for a moment and juxtapose them against two questions posed by David Brooks in a recent Atlantic magazine article. Why have Americans become so sad? And why have Americans become so mean? Brooks cites several troubling statistics about the first question that help us understand the second one. Among them are the percentage of people who say they don't have close friends has increased fourfold since 1990. More than half of all Americans say that no one knows them well. The percentage of high school students who report persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness shot up from 26% in 2009 to 44% in 2021. As to the follow-up question, why have Americans become so mean? Mr. Brooks notes several theories that many of us, I'm sure, have already discussed with friends or colleagues. There's the social media theory. It's TV shows, especially reality TV, and those programs that masquerade as journalism but are really partisan attack machines, and unmuzzled opinions posted as facts on the internet. And then there's our sociology. We don't know how to be communal, and we stopped participating in entities that stimulate the formation of community, like synagogues, churches, mosques, temples, or organizations that engender moral and ethical questioning and growth and tolerance. Brooks' article also mentions the deep well of America's white supremacist underpinnings, which we felt this afternoon, and the poisonous streams that continue to flow from it. These waters of hate and fear fuel present-day violence in word and in action. In addition, he also looks at economic phenomena, challenges experienced by too many, but notes that while this is a worldwide happening, violence and hostility are not the prevalent responses in most other countries. While Brooks acknowledges all these as valid perspectives that explain why American society acts out in such an aggressive manner, he sees the major cause as something more systemic. We are horrible at moral formation. Moral formation keeps at bay what he calls our, I love this phrase, our evolutionarily conferred egotism. He asks, how do we generate an agreed upon manner for constructive conversation and disagreement, welcoming strangers and teaching morality and ethics in a way that is non-dogmatic and creates a social fiber within which we can all thrive? How do we reflect upon American values and spread discussion that is constructive rather than combative? Some of us may say we already constructed a vehicle to address all of these questions, the Constitution. Brooks points out that for about 150 years after the ratification of the Constitution, America and Americans actively and assertively supplemented that document's ideology with morality training in all of our basic institutions, especially our schools. As late as the year I was born, 1951, a major teachers union of the time published a brief in which they maintained that American schools must have an unremitting concern for moral and spiritual values. However, a concern for moral and spiritual values is different than teaching moral and spiritual values. The American founders tended to accentuate the Jewish attitude of, you're right, and you're right too, in the Judeo-Christian ideas that they utilized to form the basis of the nation. To this day, when the Supreme Court renders a decision, the minority opinion is always keenly articulated by one or more of the justices, and it has an honored and respected place in the chronicles of the court. Why does the American system do that? Actually, it's Talmudic. Our Talmud, as you may know, is a compendium of commentaries, opinions, and discussions of the first 6 to 7 centuries of rabbinic thought. Just like in Supreme Court records, what each rabbi said during those debates is preserved. If a rabbi cited something he learned from a colleague, even if the second rabbi disagreed with his teacher, the first rabbi and his teaching are appropriately respected and attributed. Such an ethic developed in rabbinic circles in order to preserve structure, dignity, and decorum among a group who ordained one another. They self-conferred their egotism. They knew the Talmudic process would implode unless there was some regulation and restriction on their egos. No one told them to do that. There was no commission that promulgated a deep concern for moral development. That's what the rabbis were all about. The development of mores and behaviors that would hold the Jewish society together as we began living throughout the globe after the destruction of the temple, a diaspora that would last for nearly 2,000 years. And now, for the vast majority of us, despite the ebb and flow of anti-Semitism, the worldwide Jewish people are comfortable being a peoplehood among the nations. As we developed our American brand of Judaism, especially among Reform Jews, even though it takes a little chutzpah to say it, we've kept the Talmudic process going. For most Jewish Americans, our Judaism is about values and ethics and morals, much more than about rituals and customs and ceremonies. The problem is, it's difficult to maintain and reinforce values, ethics, and morals without rituals and customs and ceremonies. One of my favorite teachers, Rabbi Larry Hoffman, described his perception of Judaism in a recent podcast. We should be thinking about a fluid state whereby people are differently involved and at different levels in different ways in what I like to call the Jewish conversation. I think we should conceive of Judaism as a conversation in the making, in which we inherit a conversation of the past. And one is Jewish to the extent that one is involved in that conversation. Now the question then is, how can we involve people in the Jewish conversation? How can that training ground of the service provide an experience that is so positive that they say, now that is a deep conversation? Indeed, perhaps a service should be a gathering of Jews at significant occasions on the Jewish weekly, monthly, and yearly calendar to experience music, meditation, and conversation, and food. As Rabbi Hoffman encourages, services should be a coming together that includes discussions of individual and group perspectives on values and morals and ethics. At these occasions, we could ask, what are our values? How do we form them? How do we hold on to them? How do we express them? How do we ensure that the conversation is fluid, inspiring, deep, meaningful, and respectful? How do we bring creativity and innovation into the conversation? How do we model our conversations as a paradigm for the American conversation? My longtime metaphor for Judaism has long been a building in which each generation builds a floor. My metaphor is a cousin to that of Rabbi Hoffman's. Every floor is different, and every floor stands on all the levels created before. In order to build a floor with integrity, every new generation must travel down to the first floor, Abraham and Sarah's tent. Beginning there, and at each ensuing level, we must study and understand the architecture, the design, the construction. And even if we may vehemently disagree with a piece of framework or of bricks that were laid in previous generation, we cannot discard anything because the integrity of the structure depends on them. Our job is to use what we consider to be flaws in the previous structure to create improvements and nuances that reinforce and expand the building. We should view America just like that. Despite those who attempt to petrify American values, or those who prefer to hearken back to previous standards and previous times, the American way has been, from its outset, malleable and amendable. Just as we preserve the minority opinion of both the Talmud and the Supreme Court, and that helps to support the majority, we build America via deep discussion, a thorough thought process, regular review, and accountability. Jews can give the example of our Jewish conversation and building process to a divided America. At the core of the American building is a flexibility that enabled us to admit, sometimes reluctantly, our past mistakes and create more inclusive and adaptable values, morals, ethics, engaging everyone in the process. We needn't go too many floors down to see where we Americans missed the mark of our finest selves when we thought that it was perfectly moral to own other human beings. Prevent women and blacks from voting, put young children to work, generate and then ignore unequal access to education, quality food, healthcare, and jobs with a living wage. As we continue to build the next floor up, we need to ask ourselves, what components of our moral matrix must be re-examined and reconstructed now and for the future? How can we live up to the voting and housing rights to which we've already committed? How do we prepare for a future for our children and grandchildren that will minimize the effects of climate change that we already catalyzed? How do we address previous design flaws in the American architecture and fix them without tearing the building down? How do we enable everyone to have an opinion without repeatedly freezing into partisan deadlock? How do we have decent and productive discussions? The last question seems to me to be at the root of American meanness. Several years ago, our cantor David Shuker and I wrote a setting for some words in the prayer book from Tana Devei Eliyahu Rabbah. Le'olam yehe adam yirei shamayim, b'seter uv'galui, modeh al ha'emet, v'dover emet bilvavo. Each person should constantly revere heaven in private and in public, acknowledge the truth, and speak it in one's heart. This philosophy goes far beyond the contemporary notion of transparency. Tana Devei Eliyahu digs deeper, assuming that we know what truth is in our own lives and our hearts, and struggle to learn it in the lives and hearts of others. Unfortunately, this source also declares that we should be motivated to speak and seek the truth out of fear. Specifically, the fear of heaven. That's an awful reason to be truthful. Not from fear of punishment or embarrassment, certainly not fear of heaven. We should fearlessly and purposefully share our feelings about what is true or what we believe to be true and work toward a shared truth, reconciliation, and peace. Recently, I began reading posts by Steve Schmidt, the former moderate Republican and party strategist who became disillusioned with the direction of his party and co-founded the Lincoln Project. Over the last few weeks, Schmidt writes about unexpected encounters on the road trip that he took driving his son to college. Here's one episode on the journey. We began yesterday in a town in Trump country. While waiting outside the hotel, I struck up a conversation with a man named Fred. He was dressed in Trump regalia from head to toe. Hat, shirt, belt buckle. Atop his truck were both the Trump 2020 and 2024 flag. Fred asked me what I did. I told him that I'd spent a career working in Republican politics and had founded the Lincoln Project. I listened to him. I asked him what we were going to do about the country. Before we took off, Fred shook my hand, wished us well on our trip, and said he'd pray for our safety. I was reminded of these words contained in Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural address. With malice toward none, with charity for all. I made clear to Fred that I have no place to compromise and no room to find any with a faction that refuses to accept the results of an election. He acknowledged that Trump had lost the 2020 election. Schmidt concludes, the point of the story isn't about a conversation. It's about the good wishes at the end of the conversation, which was civil, dignified, and normal on a Wednesday morning out in America. Actually, I think the point of the story is the conversation. I'm glad their talk ended with a handshake and good wishes. But it was really that their dialogue that was civil and dignified and allowed for a conclusion that was similar to how they conducted the conversation. That is what America needs, more conversations. Social commentator Van Jones recounts a meeting with the singer Bono. Speaking of their national identities, Bono said, "I'm very proud to be Irish, and Ireland is a country. America is an idea." I've always thought about Judaism as an idea. I never thought about America as an idea, and it is. How do we build, maintain, and grow an idea? With conversations. That's what Steve Schmidt had with Fred, and that's what we need to have with each other, with other Americans, especially those with whom we probably disagree. Schmidt recalled Abraham Lincoln's words, "With malice toward none, with charity for all." Can we do that? I learned in preschool that we must use our words. That's a conversation. Snoopy says we need more hellos. Hello is how conversations begin. Mr. Rogers wrote a song about it. It's good to talk. It's good to say the things we feel. It's good to talk. I like you. I'm angry. I'm happy. I'm sad. You see, that's not bad. It's good. Not bad. Ted Lasso said we must keep going to a better place. Moving to a better place is how ideas grow. Fearlessly speaking the truth in private and in public is how we center ourselves in conversation. I need to hear what those who disagree with me say in their most private moments, and they need to hear what I say in my most private moments. Only then will we create a nurturing conversation about the American idea, so strong and so fragile. We better say hello and start talking and listen to the other and speak the truth together before it's too late. The American idea began as a conversation. The American idea ends when the conversation ends. Amen.